Here. Okay, so tonight, let's study some. And let's talk some about vengeance. It's related to the word dikao, which means to be righteous. And therefore, when you think about being righteous, vengeance that is administered through the government is fine. If it's administered fairly, it's fine because it belongs to God. And therefore, it is related to the word for righteousness when it goes to God, but not when it comes from you. Okay, not when it comes from me. And why is that? Because we have problems with vengeance. We do indeed, do we not? Whenever you grin a little bit when something bad happens to somebody that doesn't necessarily like you or your family, and all of a sudden you're thinking, what goes around, you know that. Okay, so vengeance is not mine, but it does belong to the Lord, except often we treat it as though it's ours and does not belong to the Lord. So understand you're working your way through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. An eye for an eye is what we're going to be discussing. And so let's get going. Okay, you have heard that it was said. All right, now 6 times Jesus does this. It's kind of like a homiletic device. That means something that you use repetitively, because remember, these people don't have PowerPoint, and these people don't have any visual aids whatsoever, and therefore, anything that Jesus can do to help them to remember what he said, he's going to help them to do that. And therefore, he's going to repeat, you have heard that it hath been said, or it has been said of old, you have heard that it has been said. He's going to do that 6 times. And this happens to be the 5th one. All right, so whenever you have heard, now that he's often referring to maybe a traditional stance or something that one of the rabbis has said that they are familiar with. And therefore, when the rabbi speaks, it becomes a matter of oral tradition, and to some of the Jews, just as binding as anything else in the Old Testament. Why? Because it was a rabbinic interpretation. They trust the rabbi. The rabbi would not lead them wrong, and so they're going to be asking rabbis various things. By the way, I was in Birmingham, Alabama this morning. I've been on the road a good deal. Jeff Jenkins, one of my best friends as well. Some of you might know the Jenkins Institute. He had shoulder surgery this morning, and yesterday he had it, and this morning we left down there because we wanted to be with him. And coming back, my wife has vertigo, and that's why she's not here, because it's difficult for her to know which way's north. Okay, and so hopefully she was better before I left her, or I wouldn't have left her, but I did swing by the house in Woodbury, Tennessee, to leave her before I came here. All right, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other as well. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have, this is the ESV, will have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who asks to borrow from you. Wow, if there's not some limits to this, we're in trouble, aren't you? You know, because you could go downtown Crossville and say, hey, Sunday we're going to start giving away money to people who are poor. Well, how much of your church budget could you give away in 30 minutes? All of it. You know, you could give away all your church budget. So does that mean that there are no limits to this? Because there are people that will be on the corners of just about every city or medium-sized community saying, you know, I'm helpless and I don't want to get so-and-so and so-and-so. And they're there. So if you want to, my wife is, by the way, more prone to do that than I am. You know, she's a softie. And she'll buy something at McDonald's or someplace, and she'll bring it by and drop it. That's probably not what they necessarily wanted. They probably wanted money. But nonetheless, she'll drop by a lunch, or I've known some people that keep stuff in the back of their car, like with a Bible in it, and you have a van that says Bible study with some Bible studies in it, and therefore if somebody needs something, you can give them a coupon at the gas station and then all this other stuff in a little bag when they pass by. So I'm not opposed to helping people, but I want you to know that if there's not a limit to benevolence, then we're all going to be in big trouble, because there's nothing else that you can do with benevolence if there's not some limits to what's being said here. So let's talk about what I believe that Jesus meant. Now, we need to reject the popular. I got some R words here. Maybe you can remember them. By the way, I do love David Light, and I'm sorry that he's sick. I'm sorry that I said that, but not really. Okay, all right, so reject the popular view. What is the popular view? Why do you think she's pouring coffee in his lap? Well, because he's done something to her. And because he's done something to her, it's time for him to get what he's been giving, because he's saying, well, why are you doing that to me? Well, probably you don't see, because the second person gets called for the foul in basketball. Okay? It's not the first person, but the second person. Or in football. Or here's the deal. Something happens and you feel like the pitcher of the opposing team has brushed one of your batters, and so he's down in the dirt because, he's you think, well, he's been aiming in his head. Then all of a sudden, everybody gets out on the field, starts beating up on each other as though they're kindergartners. Okay, and why do they do that? Well, you got to protect your team, and that kind of stuff. I like baseball and I like sports, but there's got to be some limit to vengeance, because let me tell you, the person who's got the finger on all the buttons is the president. And if he or she chooses to press the nuclear button codes and they are authenticated, by other people, then that means, let me just tell you, we're going to be searching for an alternate place to live, because, radiation is going to be around a long time, maybe 1,000 years, which is going to be longer than most of us. So I hope that we don't get into a situation where we retaliate because somebody else did this. And by the way, when you retaliate, you don't do an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You do 2 eyes and 2 teeth. Why? Because you go one further. And then the next thing you know, there's one further. One of my daughters got 4. Why? Because we don't want 5. Got 9 grandchildren, and it'd be, wonderful to have more of those. All right, but whenever we think about this one daughter, it's difficult to teach them to stand up for themselves and obey all the rules of the school. John Bush, I met you. You're a superintendent somewhere. Okay? And so you usually have this kind of rule. If you get in a fight, both of you get suspended. But in my daughter's case, he kicked the crutch out from under her because she had trouble with her leg and she fell down the steps. So she got up and hit him with it. Okay, so you say, all right, did she get detention? Yes. Is that the full story? No. Is that the way she should have responded? No. Is that the way that I was thinking? Yeah. Okay, maybe I was thinking that, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily right, because you don't see the rest of the story. So Jesus, his homiletic device is, you have heard, but I say to you. In this case, the issue would be the limits of retaliation. This is not about, some people think, this means that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You can go up to this point, but you can't go further. But the truth is, it's really for those who have never been given anything about retaliation at all, and they are told, look, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And in Latin, this is lex talionis. And it means an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Okay, and it means that this is the way that you punish, but you shouldn't punish beyond that which is fair. So it comes from Exodus 21 and verse 24, Leviticus 24, 19 through 20, Deuteronomy 19, 21, etc. But retaliation in sports and everything else escalates quickly. Why? Because the next person's got to do a little more. And then it means you got to do more back to them. And then you got to do more back to them until boom, all of a sudden, the whole school gets suspended because everybody's out there because a couple of guys started doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. For Jesus' followers, mercy and grace are appropriate ways to respond to those who have wronged us. Why? Because that's how God has responded to us. If God had responded to us in like kind, since, how many sinners do we have here tonight? Anybody? Okay, I am. Okay, so, and according to the Bible, how many are sinners? Well, how come you didn't raise your hand? Romans 3, verse 23, all have sinned. That doesn't mean you're currently in sin, but that means you have sinned. All right, have you sinned? All right, at the point at which you have sinned, you violated the holiness and justice of God. At that point, you could have been killed. At that point, God could have wiped you out. So that if indeed, at that point, all of us have received mercy and grace, or we wouldn't be here tonight. Even with my weird psychotic nerve. I know it's sciatic, but it feels psychotic. Okay, and so I'm having a little trouble walking, but just ignore that. Okay, so reject the popular view, which means if you're going to do things the way Jesus said to do them, you're going to have to change your thinking. It's not just your behavior that Jesus wants to change, because, you see somebody stop by the side of the road, blue lights flashing, and their behavior has been changed, right? Oh, no. Not usually. Because you just don't watch them after they take off when the highway patrol officer turns around and goes the other direction, and then what are they doing? Okay, are they sorry? No, they're not sorry. And maybe sorry that they got caught, and their billfold may be affected, but they're not sorry. So rejecting the popular view means I need to change the way I'm thinking about this from the inside out and not just modify behavior. Now, behavior modification is sometimes appropriate. I know I'm from an old generation, but if there's a kid throwing a flying hissy in the middle of Walmart, those of us who are old know what to do about that. Okay, matter of fact, Joyce and I thought about wearing a sign, talk to us. Okay, we can help you with that child who weighs 20 pounds and you weigh considerably more. Okay, so if you think that we're talking about the popular view, change from the inside out. Does that mean that sometimes that you discipline your child to modify their behavior? Yes. Well, what are you really going for? Modification of their heart. What's on the inside? Therefore, the Beatitudes, the Happitudes, they're first. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Do those first. So, I taught students at Freed Harbor I stood in the classroom for 39 years, John. I don't know how many I actually taught in Tracy, but I was there for 39 years, and I love the years. It doesn't seem like it was 39 years, and I do miss college students. I do not miss the periphery. I don't miss the, accreditation mess and 10-year planning and all that stuff. I'm so glad to get away from that. All right, but I do miss college students, and I miss college faculty who we'd eat together at lunch. That's pretty cool. So what you're trying to do is to help them to see that this applies to them. So in my Life of Christ class or other classes, I would have life applications. Meaning, okay, you've looked at this passage. Okay, what does this mean in your life? And some of the students are thinking, what are you asking of me? Okay, I tell you what I'm asking of you. I'm asking for you to personalize this text and put it in your life and see what it looks like. What does it look like in your life? Not just in the Bible. What does it look like in your life? So, the popular view, I have to reject because Jesus tells me that I must do it. By the way, Jesus is not saying the Old Testament is wrong. Remember, he came not to destroy the law, but to fill it full. So whenever he did that, remember, he's not trying to contradict, and he's not contradicting the law itself. He's telling you, however, to do something that's difficult to do, and that is respond with grace. All right, something bad happens to you, what do? Well, you try to take the high road. Respond with grace. Respond with grace. Respond with grace. Why? Because grace has been extended to you. Grace is when you know this. What's grace now? When you get what? This is not a sermon yet. I'm going to be offering an invitation later on. I'm asking you. Okay, so what is grace? All right, when you get what you don't deserve. And what's mercy? When you don't get what you do deserve. Okay, so how many of us have received grace and mercy? Well, Paul has. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. He'd received grace and mercy. And it seems to me that sometimes the more that a person is aware of the fact that they are a sinner, the more they appreciate grace and mercy. Why? Because of the stuff that they've done in their past. So, respond with grace. Now, how do you respond with grace? Now, grace calls for a response. Otherwise, you can sing about Amazing Grace all you want to and leave the auditorium and act as though you've never been here. But if you're going to sing about Amazing Grace, then the question is, what does that look like in your family, with your spouse? What does that look like with your relationship with your children? What does that look like in church? What does that mean in church? To respond with grace to each other. We got a lot of churches of Christ in Middle Tennessee, which is a good thing. You know what a bad thing is? We've got a lot of churches of Christ in Middle Tennessee. All right, and good thing is, we can go somewhere else. And so maybe some members leave one congregation, they go to another congregation. I hear about that all the time. And you think, boy, we're really growing. You ain't growing. You're sheep shuffling. You're shuffling sheep. I mean, the brothers and sisters in Christ, they get mad at one place in 5 minutes, spit any direction, and you can hit another church of Christ. They go somewhere else. Rather than to say, wow, okay, now what does grace look like in my life? All right, and so Jesus is going to help you here. He's going to give you 3 examples of what it means to go the extra mile and to respond with grace. Are you ready for this? Turn the other cheek. Now, some of you can probably study, you can study in your study notes, and you can see here that this is not about physical violence. This is not about a husband beating up his wife and she should just take it. No. This is not about a child being abused and that child should just shut up and take it because that, after all, they are a child. No, no, no. That is not it. The word slap comes from the word palm, as in palm of your hand. So when a person is slapped, it ain't never fun. Ask Will Smith. You know, when he slaps the comedian and the comedian won a $40 million lawsuit against him because of one slap on public television. Did it kill him? Well, no. But he claimed that it hurt him, because a slap will hurt you because it's like right down to your soul if your mother or dad slaps you. I was in a meeting not long ago at Cherry Creek, which is not too far from here. Matter of fact, I don't know who invented going through Sparta, but they need to be shot. Okay, so you go through. So I finally get through Sparta, and there's a little church 5 miles north of Sparta, Cherry Creek, and it's wonderful people there. Love those people there. So whenever you think about a slap, oh yeah, I know what the story was. Okay, so the church secretary is sitting on the third row, and my wife and I are sitting on the second row, and she thumps my ear. All right, I haven't forgiven her for this yet, because that hadn't happened to me I'm 73, so it hadn't happened to me in 60 years. Okay, you know, when my mother would do that, I'm saying, Kimberly, what are you doing? It turns out we're good friends. Okay, but that's not the same as a slap. Okay, so if somebody slaps you, that means now that they've done something to insult you, to humiliate you, and you're thinking in somehow or another, you know, my next move is that, you know, you're going to be 6 feet under because you have slapped me. Okay, then a slap turns into a fist fight. Then a fist fight turns into a knife fight. Knife fight turns into a gun fight until something else happens because of the fact that we don't have any place to where we can apply this and stop. His point is to better endure being insulted twice than to escalate the violence. This principle does not, by the way, condone violence, but it is saying, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to think. One thing about David Lipe and me is that we've both tried to check our, Alan, we've both tried to check our attitude about the ministry. And that is, don't take yourself so seriously that you got this huge ego and the brotherhood can't even stand you. You know, or if they do stand you, they think that it's a good thing for you to have an ego. It is not a good thing for you to have an ego. And therefore, are you supposed to stand up for yourself? Well, that's different. But I'm talking about somebody who has such an ego that they cannot apply the principle that Jesus is talking about here. Turning the other cheek is opening your heart and being vulnerable to getting hurt by others, because that's what Jesus did. Also called preaching, because you're going to be hurt. Now, I've done this for over 50 years. You're going to be hurt. And it seems to hurt worse when it comes from your brethren. Jeff and Dale Jenkins, I've just been with them and left this morning. The Jenkins Institute, a lot of people apply to them when they're looking for a preacher, or a preacher when he's looking for a place to preach, will apply through them. So when we think about those guys, let me just tell you what hurts. Give you a case, no details. It's done repeatedly in the church where a preacher thinks that he's pretty solid with the elders. And so he begins to make a place for himself. And everything is good. And then they add one new elder or two new elders. And then 3 months or 4 months later, he's fired. When as a matter of fact, you think, well, what's up with that? Well, I tell you what's up with that. That's not the way that you would treat a dog. So why would you think that it's okay to hurt the preacher and treat him as though he is an expendable employee? He is not an expendable employee. Alan, you can pay me for this later. Okay, he is not. That's what Jesus did. And if Jesus was able to do that, then we should try to do it. And give him the tunic. And that's the inner garment as well as the outer garment. The outer garment, you want to say, oh, my wife's cold, and I'll give her an outer garment. Why? Well, we're in a restaurant, and she's always cold. Okay, so I give her the outer, that's fine. But not just the outer garment, strip down to the inner garment and give the inner garment as well. Now that's difficult to do because Exodus 22 says that you shouldn't really have to do that, except the problem is that, because that's part of your security and protection, except Jesus is asking us to do that if necessary to be that sacrificial in our giving, to try to help other people, because understanding that whatever it is that we have is on loan from God anyway. There's no hearse, there's no U-Haul behind the hearse. I mean, you're going to leave it here. This one guy was putting money in an old tow sack and hanging it up in the basket. You know what a tow sack is? Okay, and he was stuffing money in there and taking it away from his wife and stuffing it in there and saving it and saving it and saving it. His theory was that when he died, he was going to pass right by the sack and take it with him on his way to heaven. Well, the old man dies. And now the wife after the funeral thinks about that sack. And so she says, what about that sack? So she goes up there, and the sack is still there hanging, and they still got money in it. And then she said to herself, I guess he should have hung it in the basement. Okay, so are you going to take it with you? No. So give them it's kind of like, okay, are you willing to do this for the sake of the Lord Jesus Christ? Matthew 5 and verse 40. Okay, so number 3, go the second mile. The entire sermon could be based on this, obviously. But don't you like it when you get a baker's dozen? You go to a place and you're supposed to get 12 of a donut or something, they give you 13. Get 12 donuts. There's a place on the way to Henderson, Alan. In the morning, I drove that road for 39 years. And there's a donut place in Henderson. You ask for a dozen donuts, they give you at least 15. And let me just tell you, those people were wonderful. They've got to be going to heaven. I mean, that's just wonderful because you were going the extra mile. We're staying in a motel last night in Birmingham. And the air conditioner goes out about 11 o'clock. And we had to move rooms at 11 o'clock in the morning. And so how is the front desk going to respond? Well, here's how they responded. We're going to give you a room 2 doors down with a really cold air conditioner, and we're going to give you a free night. And you know what that says? I want you back. And I don't want this to be an opportunity for you to stop coming here. When people come to the Crossville Church of Christ, by the way, is it Main Street or Crossville? Okay, when people come to the Crossville Church of Christ, you have a few seconds to impress them one way or the other when they come in the door. It's called curb appeal. And they make judgments about you in the first few seconds. Now, thankfully, I was greeted by a lot of people, and even though my shirt tail was still hanging out and I'd been in the car too long and I had to go, tough it in, but I was greeted by a lot of people and I felt welcome here. But what about strangers who are not speaking on Wednesday night? Are they welcome? The James chapter 2 idea of the man who comes on, I envision him coming into the assembly with overalls. And then the other guy comes into the assembly with a $12,000 Italian-made suit. And everybody falls over him. Wow, church budget, whoo. Okay, and then the guys in the overalls, ignore him. So go the extra mile. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means do more than is required. If you have a student like this, John was that way as a student. Tracy, I remember you, but you were more quiet. Okay, but going the extra mile means if you tell a student that you want so-and-so, you get that much and more than you ask for. It's pretty rare. I got daughters who are teachers, and one of them is a teacher aide. 3 of them teachers, 1 is a teacher aide. None of them can take care of us when we get really old. Okay, because they're all teachers. Okay, and so I asked one of my daughters, how many students do you have? And she told me, and I said, Jack Lewis at Harding Graduate School used to say this: how many students do you have, Dr. Lewis? He'd say, about 10%. In other words, there's about 10% who really want to be students, and the other 90% just want to get a degree. You know, and it's a big difference in that, is it not? Going the extra mile, what would that look like where you work? Your school, your office, your place of business, your store. What would it look like if you determined that from now on you're going to go the extra mile for your customers? Now, the customer's not always right, but you need to treat him with respect anyway. And so I got thinking about this years ago. What is Jesus asking of me? He's asking me to be a shock absorber. So we're behind a car on the way to Birmingham, and it goes over a rough spot, and it goes, whoa, 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 whoa. And they keep bouncing and bouncing. Why is that? Because bad shocks. Maybe bad coil springs too, but at least bad shocks. And so why are the shocks there? Well, when you hit a rough spot in the road, you know, the coil springs are kind of there to help stabilize that, but the shock absorber is going to say, I'm not just going to come back up dramatically, we're going to ease you up and smooth that ride out. How many people at church could use some smoothing out of their ride? You know why? Because you chose to absorb shock rather than to repeat a gossip. You chose to absorb shock rather than to tattletale on somebody at church. You chose to absorb the shock. And that means you're going to know it when this guy, if those things are not there, when, you know, that strut assembly and all that stuff. I don't know a lot about cars. But the point is that when it's not there, I'm going to tell you, when you go over a railroad track, you're going to regret it. Or you're following somebody with a trailer that doesn't have shocks, and then what happens? The trailer goes, and sometimes it begins to sway left and right like a truck I was following coming into Sparta with the many turns. It was Crossville Dairy. And every time he'd go around a little place in the road, he'd go, I'm thinking, I do not want to be next to that guy if he goes around a corner too quick, because that truck is going to topple. Now, your life, what does it look like if you said, I'm not going to respond the way that a non-Christian would? I'm going to try to respond the way a Christian would. Now, number 3, reflect on how true justice differs from vengeance. You say, well, Brother Alpha, you're going to tell us about this? Well, maybe. Okay, so what is the difference? You know, it's justice if I pursue it, and it's vengeance if I see it in somebody else. But if I do it, it's justified, is it not? Therefore, it is justice. Because what I did to this person, they deserve. Now, I know that there can be good-hearted, practical joking. My father-in-law, Gene Thornton, was a big practical joker. And sometimes I remember he got in, one of the guys in town who did the local paper, they liked to joke back and forth. So Brother Thornton signed him up for a magazine that he didn't order, and they just started coming and coming and coming. And so to get back at him, when Brother Thornton was to be at a funeral, this guy took Brother Thornton's car out of the procession and parked it 2 blocks away, so that when he went out, you know, there's no car there. Now, is that okay? Yeah, some of that's okay. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about stuff that's done with malice. So let's look at some of the things. Vigilantism, by the way, is proven historically and philosophically to be disastrous. It's not a good thing whenever everybody did what was right in their own eyes, because there was no king in Israel. All right? And everybody just does what they want to. So justice, I believe, definitely lies with the officials of the government, Romans 13, 1 through 7. And we should try to remember the difference between these two. So are you going to help me? Well, if you can read it. Okay, justice is the process or result of using law fairly to judge and punish crimes and criminals. Vengeance is the act of hurting or harming someone in return for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands. Justice is served by a court of law. Vengeance is enforced by an individual or a group of individuals who think it's their idea to overthrow the government or whatever. Number 3, justice is associated with morality and fairness, whereas revenge or vengeance is associated with vengeance and retaliation. Justice aims to right a wrong, whereas revenge just aims to retaliate. And then on the left-hand side, justice should bring closure to the matter, whereas on the other hand, it might lead to a never-ending cycle for you. And then finally, one is from the head and the other is from the heart. Rational should be from the head, and vengeance is often from the heart. So I think about my friend Dan Winkler, whose son was shot in the back with a shotgun by his wife. You remember the headlines. All right, how long would that be before you could do anything positive with that? Well, for him and Diane, it was no time at all. Because here's what Dan said to me as when I was asking him about this one time. He said, I had forgiven her even though she never asked for it. Even though she never asked for it, I have already forgiven her. Why? If I don't forgive her, what's going to happen to my ministry? What's going to happen to me personally if I don't forgive her? So Luke 23, verse 34, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. By the way, if he forgave them at that spot, then why do they still have their sins in Acts chapter 2? So saying, Father, forgive them is an attitude and not an actuality. Meaning, I am not dying with vengeance and hatred and malice in my heart. I am not going to do that, and you cannot make me do that. Whatever you do to me, you cannot make me do that. And so he says, Father, forgive them, because they're ignorant. They don't know. They're going to know. But right now, many of them don't know. By the way, some of them who heard him really did know. And so, number 4, remember the example of Jesus. Because, well, there's the thorns, and this is not like rose bush. For some of you have been to Israel, you have seen the thorns, some of which are an inch long. I've seen some similar in West Texas. And you press them down. What is that about? And then there's stripes on your back, and then you put a robe on it, and the robe adheres to the blood from the wounds you've already inflicted. And then you slap him around, and then you say to him, blindfolded, who did that? If you're truly a prophet, tell me, who was it that did that? But our Lord, according to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, died with no guile in his mouth. There were no words saying, and I understand that there's a passage that kind of hints at the fact that he could have called some angels if he'd wanted to. It doesn't say 10,000. But the truth is, he doesn't need to call angels. I mean, why does he need to call angels? Because according to John chapter 10, he's dying of his own initiative, verses 18 and 19. And if he's dying of his own initiative, then that means if he wants to, he can go ping, 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 and those nails just come out of the hands and the feet. And he just gets off the cross and he says, is that all you got? He could have done that. But he didn't do that. So what are you going through this week that's worse than that? Some of us have grudges with somebody that we won't talk to because of something that happened 15 years ago. And we won't even talk about it because of the fact that the hurt still remains. Well, maybe it's time for you to make a move. Maybe it's time for you tonight, if you can, place a phone call. Now, if you can, visit. If you can't visit, place a phone call. As a very last resort, send a text or an email. The more personal you can make it, the better it is. You cannot control their response, But you can control your side of the situation. You can't do theirs. I was dumb enough to think for a while there that I was controlling my children. I was making them mind, as we used to say in the country. I was making my children mind. Why? Because you just snap your fingers, boom. There they are. You can fix it. But as it turns out, that doesn't guarantee that their heart has been changed. Because a lot of our kids graduate from youth groups, and maybe as high as 50% of them drop out of church. Or they go to church somewhere else, the name of which you never heard of before. Or they go to a very different kind of church because they're tired of the church where they grew up, and we're wondering, well, why is that? Well, sometimes it's because of nothing that you did. Sometimes it's because of nothing that the pulpit preacher did or the youth minister did, because they have freedom of choice and they can choose that if they want to. I'm not asking you to try to control that. I'm trying to ask you to control what is within your power. That's part of the serenity prayer. Controlling what is within your power. You can't make them do that. It becomes immediate very quickly that Rebecca is born with her own freedom of choice. And she's sweet right now because she cannot talk back to you, hon. Okay, but the day will come probably that she can talk back with you, and you can reassess your history. Okay, and you can say to yourself, whoa, man, what are you talking about? You believe that my child would say that to me? Do you believe they would do that? Remember the example of Jesus. Don't try to manipulate and control by taking vengeance. That's just another way of trying to control the situation. Now, some things you're supposed to control. You know, I was a pilot for a while before it occurred to me that I was a preacher and a teacher at Freed-Hardeman. I couldn't afford it. Okay, but I did like to fly, and so my flight instructor would say, the airplane is a machine. Control the machine. Oh yeah, you can do that usually, unless maybe a wing falls off. Okay, but you can do that. But what you can't do is do that with people with freedom of choice. You can't do that. So, Jesus is the king because he was able to do what we would not. Rule over sin instead of being ruled by sin. He did not give into his desire, but denied himself so as to obey God. He even has been known to say, Father, not my will, but yours be done. So here are the key words for tonight. Number 1, reject the view that's wrong. Number 2, respond with grace. Number 3, make sure and ask yourself if you're trying to take vengeance or if you're trying to do the right thing. And then finally, remember that Jesus Christ has already laid down the footprints for you to walk in them. I assume it's time for me to quit because I'm losing most of my audience. So I'll see you at the invitation.